dear listeners. I'm Darina Blogina. In this episode of our Zamus mini-series, we take a closer look at the stories we tell on stage and those we inherit in silence. What happens when the magic in the Magic Flute turns troubling, or when St. John Passion reveals centuries-old prejudices still echoing in today's concert halls? We will be hearing excerpts from the presentation of Leyla Ercan at the symposium Creating New Spaces on Critical Classics Project, an initiative that looks deeply into the words we perform and how to engage with them critically and ethically without turning away. Leyla works as a cultural consultant and speaker, specializing on change processes, diversity development, inclusion, and critical cultural practices in cultural institutions.
I would like to give a quote by Tanya El-Khoury, a British Lebanese theatre scholar and artist, who says, "I dislike theatre as a space above everything. I dislike its hierarchical relationships, its church-like preciousness, its imbalanced relationships to audience, its imposed quietness and politeness, its inaccessibility, its whiteness, its elitism, its classicism, its racism, its sexism, its heteronormativity, its ableism, its ageism, the fact that having an old body, a sick body, a trans body, a disabled body, a body of color on stage is an act of radicalism."
Then we go on with Änne-Marthe Kühn, a dramaturge who reflects on strategies of rereading and representing problematic texts in early music.
I'm a dramaturge for music theater of all kinds, but I developed to be more in the newer music, in the contemporary music field a little bit more. I always felt also in the past, in the beginning of my work, I felt like operas are very I love operas. But sometimes they seem to be outdated. Sometimes they really reproduce problematic topics or tropes, like misogynist ideas or racist ideas. And for me, it was very important to look at these old pieces, not in a museal sense, but in a contemporary sense.
This critique comes especially from people and artists who are affected by discrimination themselves. Many formerly marginalized groups are more empowered today than before. They now demand to discuss their needs and requirements on equal terms. They want epistemic sovereignty and decision-making power in the arts. They want to actively participate and shape things. And this means a shift in power balances. And what they criticize most regarding the current operatic repertoire is that it consists predominantly of historical works from the 18th and 19th century. Naturally, the texts and plots of these works reflect the morals, the etiquette, the role models of their time, namely the 18th and 19th century. And especially the colonial imagery and thought patterns.
Could you tell us about the aims of the Critical Classics project and how it all began?
There were a lot of questions we had in the beginning. We had to explore and analyze especially the basic narrative structures of the operatic works. Who is telling what about whom, with what intention, from what cultural perspective, and in what way? There were a lot of questions that were kind of related to these basic questions. How and from what perspective are the others, women, ethnicized, racialized people, the oppressed people, narrated? Are they portrayed as individuals or imagined as faceless, de-individualized figures of a fantasized collective? What is the hegemonic relationship between the characters? How are the power relations distributed in the gender-based, binary, oppositional, imaginary? Who experiences violence and who commits violence? Who talks about which topic? Who talks how about which other groups of characters? Who is allowed to represent and distinguish themselves? Who is described and externally determined by others? What share of the speech is given to female characters, male characters, and racialized characters? What role do they play in the active plot? Which character is dominant and spokesperson in the play, exercising interpretative authority over the events? How is this dominance expressed at the plot level? Whose speech acts drive the plot? Which characters are self-reliant and effective in their actions, and which characters are portrayed as passive, persecuted, and driven victims? So, these are the questions we started, and we're a team of a lot of people. This team is diverse, multi-perspective, and multi-professional.
I joined the project. Bertolt Schneider started it. We want to keep the original piece as close to the original as possible, but without having those discriminatory sentences or ideas. Because normally when you look at operas, the directors, the leading team will take the piece, will take the material and change it anyways. Especially when you have, like in Zauberflöte, you have a lot of dialogues. The dialogues are changed a lot, but the text that is sung mostly remains unchanged.
Did you have a discussion with the audience? How did they communicate? And you understood that now we need to work on that to, let's say, to look at the libretto of an opera in order to find these not fitting sentences and words to our time anymore.
I would like to give 3 examples of how estranged the audiences current audiences sometimes feel when attending a traditional European opera. There is an acquaintance of Turkish origin who told me once, I used to enjoy watching Oriental plays like Die Entführung aus dem Serail, Aida and Othello. Now I avoid these plays because I find the sexualization and exoticization of female characters, especially women of color, outdated and unpleasant. And a colleague from Cameroon told me once, I like going to the opera, but I've never seen a production of Othello. I'm too uncomfortable with the familiar racist ideas and imagery I'll probably be presented with. Give me one reason why I should watch it when I experience it all the time in my everyday life. Nobody needs that. And I also wonder why opera audiences still need these images. And there's also a situation Bertolt Schneider experienced in 2022, where he attended a performance of a modern production of Mozart's Magic Flute in Wuppertal, which he describes as follows. The audience was amused from the very beginning of the overture and seemed to enjoy the play. Yet at some points it was clearly noticeable that the audience wasn't laughing with the theatre, but at it. It was at lines like Ein Weib tut wenig, plaudert viel, a woman does little, but chatters much. It was these lines that people distanced themselves from the performance with embarrassed laughter. It seemed that this contemporary performance aimed at modern audiences still carried outdated messages the audience could not identify with. We now regularly observe such reactions from audiences in the theatre.
And now let's take a closer look at the theatre processes that are containing a multiple amount of possibilities to re-accentuate a character.
I mean, Monostatos in Zauberflöte is most of the time he's not portrayed as a person of color, but then, for example, the entire conflict of his rage, of his reasons for being the way he is erased when he's not being mistreated, for example. So this is something that has to be looked at. Okay, how can we fix it, mainly without having some racist ideas behind it?
Schneider also describes how the processes usually are at the theatres, the opera houses. In developing the Magic Flute, the dramaturgy and director, as usual, had smoothed out the text to the best of their ability, and they also had visually diffused it. For example, Monostatos was cast with a white singer and was not portrayed as a person of color. At the same time, this meant that a strong contrast deliberately created in the libretto was simply removed without replacement. Some other dialogue passages were changed and many were deleted, but even this almost routine approach of shortening and patching did not lead to a performance in which the audience could simply overlook the problematic parts of the text. So Bertolt Schneider was very aware of this, of the social debates going on about dealing with historical works of art in relation to sexism, racism, exoticism. And he also dealt with the question of whether works of art with sensitive content can and should be received in modified versions in the future. And this is a discussion he had with his colleagues all the time.
For the Zauberflöte, we had a conductor there. We had like singers there to really see how it can be sung, or is there problems. And for St. John's Passion also, like, we had experts, but for here, of course, people from the church, from the Jewish community, and so really experts in these fields that are mentioned in the pieces.
I'm very curious about the strategies that you use at Critical Classics. How do you work with the language? Could you maybe give some examples if you find something inappropriate with the help of the experts? How do you then deal with the text?
So how do we proceed when looking at the operatic repertoire? In the case of a revision, we look at the problematic aspects of a libretto in the dialogues and the vocal text and try to identify these problematic aspects in collaboration with diversity experts. A creative team then develops strategies for the changes and the new texts. If a libretto cannot be meaningfully brought closer to current standards through revision, we think about developing a new libretto completely based on the existing music. A team supported by diversity experts develops a new libretto based on the vocal lines of the music.
For example, with Monostatos, there we created a new storyline where the color of the skin is absolutely not necessary for anything anymore, and we start to really look into the character. It's really more like regarding the personality, but not looking on the outside, but in the inside, right? For example, Pamina, she's really like just a love object, right? Tamino sees her picture, he falls in love and he starts looking for her, and she never really has a saying in this. So she basically is elected and then has to follow what Tamino's story will tell her. And she's really, she's not really having any any action in that. So there we gave her another aria where she also sees a picture of Tamino, and she really can. She really gets into a different, activity in that sense.
So you just take the aria from the existing aria from the Magic Flute, the music, and then you just kind of rewrite the text to that aria. I just try to understand how technically you deal with the texture of the opera.
For Pamina, we inserted an existing Mozart aria. There is this dialogue between Papageno and Papagena, and Papagena is changed into an old woman, and Papageno is saying, "No, you're so old. I don't like you." That in that sense, and that, for example, came to us as ageism, and really like why are women less attractive when they're older, like in that sense. And so there also we went into the idea to look into different character traits of people. And so, for example, here we put Papagena in we changed it just a slight bit towards she's very, very self-confident, and Papageno is being a little bit shy about that and being okay, he can't really handle self-confident women. So that's a small change, and it doesn't have to being discriminatory, but can really find another conflict for those characters and explain why they act how they act.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting twist because it's almost like a psychological inner conflict. And I was wondering, how do you find those inner conflicts that are relevant for our time? Do you have also a psychologist on the board that is also working with the text?
No, actually right now we don't. But I mean, it's we have people that really have been writing a lot. Everyone has been authoring a couple of theater pieces or books, or as I said, Hartmut Alkodi was an author for the Zauberflöte, and he's known for his theater plays and stories for children. We basically did similar steps for the St. John's Passion, getting closer to the St. John's Passion. We rather looked at the St. John's Passion as an artistic piece and not a piece for the Christian liturgy or something.
And I was wondering, because these stories, they're evergreen. Why do we still need those images, those stories? I think in the symposium there was also a question about that, Magic Flute, Othello, Aida. Why is it still so popular at the theater? People go, tickets are being sold.
Yeah, that's actually a good question, because I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that. Why is it so important? I mean, actually, I think the force of the music is predominant for those pieces, and that's something that's so unique that you can't really replace it with anything else. I mean, they tell us something about our past, right? Like they tell us something about where we come from. I think that's also important to know for us today, how we are still standing on the shoulders of our ancestors.
Here are some key ways in which colonialism has shaped European opera. First of all, there is exoticism and orientalism. Many operas from the 18th and 19th centuries, such as Aida, Verdi's Aida, Puccini's Madama Butterfly, or Mozart's The Abduction from the Seraglio, reflect Orientalist fantasies of the East Africa. These works often depict non-European settings in a way that is simplified and stereotyped, a way that is based on Western fantasies, not on cultural realities, and it's structured around superior European viewpoint. There is a great work by Edward Said, Orientalism, in which he helps us understand how these representations serve to construct the Orient as passive, sensual, irrational, and in need of Western control or salvation. Also, the narratives, the opera narratives, replicate colonial hierarchies. Oftentimes, white and European characters are portrayed as complex, noble, or tragic. The non-European characters are often othered, portrayed as mysterious, dangerous, seductive, or submissive. Non-European women are especially hypersexualized and portrayed as tragic victims. For example, Tojo-san in Madama Butterfly. And these representations echo the colonial logic of domination, exploitation, and racial hierarchy.
Some texts are timeless. But if we are to love early music truthfully, we must also be willing to question them. In our final episode, we will hear from the people who make this very conversation possible. The persons behind the decolonization symposium, Creating New Spaces itself.